Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Town of Prescott Valley's presentation of the town's role in water and development in the Prescott Valley area and our AMA, the Active Management Area for the Town of Prescott Valley, the Town of Prescott, Dewey Humboldt to some degree, and a big portion of the county. My name is Bob Recker, and I'm here to facilitate this presentation with John Munderloh, who I'll introduce in just a moment. He's the expert here, and I'm just going to try to facilitate and fill in a question or two to be a little bit like a devil's advocate for some of the slides we're going to go through. And I've past city councilman in the city of Prescott from 2001 to 2009, and I'm current member of the governor's Underground Water Advisory Committee. We call it the GUAC, and I always mess up a little bit on the GUAC. So that's my current position concerning water issues. I've been involved with water for a long time here in the Prescott area. And John Munderloh, who is currently the water resource manager of the town of Prescott Valley, who's the real expert here. And John, take it away.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you. Welcome.
I guess a little bit more about why we're here and why we can talk about this. My background, I've been a water resource professional for 34 years. I've been with the town of Prescott Valley for 17. I'm a engineer trained in water resource engineering, and I grew up here. I was born in Prescott, and I grew up in Skull Valley, and have been immersed in water my whole life.
No pun intended.
No pun intended.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, the town's role in water development, and I guess the big question that we've written down here, which is the one we want to answer today, we're only going to go through a portion of the water issue because it's so complex, so we want to cover just part of it. But the question we want to answer today is Prescott Valley growing foolishly beyond its water supply? And let's start with that question and go from there.
Thanks, Bob. That is a big question, isn't it?
It's the one.
And I can say that the town has not had an additional groundwater allocation in 22 years. There have been no additional allocations for residential growth in 22 years in Prescott Valley. And it'll take a bit to explain that.
Yes, I'm sure.
So I think we kind of have to start from the beginning, which is a little bit about how the water management system in our area works. So this goes back at least to 1980, but 1980 was a very seminal moment in our water history in Prescott Valley and in the whole basin. In 1980, the legislature passed the 1980 Groundwater Management Act. That created a whole body of water laws. It created those areas shown on the screen on the state map that are colored polygons. Those are active management areas, and you can see the Prescott Active Management Area up there in the center of Arizona. Those 5 active management areas are where groundwater and water resources in general are very heavily managed. They encompass about 15% of the state's area, but about 85% of the state's population lives there. So that's why there's so much focus on those areas. Along with the passage of that act, they created a whole new state agency. I included a picture of their building down on the Capitol Mall. It's not the little building by the palm tree. It's the great big building behind it, full of experts on water. There's hydrologists and regulators and lawyers and all kinds of very highly educated people there that regulate water use and growth on water in our area for pretty much all of the water users.
I've heard people say that the AMA, the Active Management Area, is the ultimate consumer protection act for water. And you know, when you look at the map and you see the areas that are covered with AMAs, it's the bulk of people that live in the state of Arizona. The only other big town would be Flagstaff and maybe Kingman a little bit, but for the most part, we've got most of the population covered.
Right, and one of the key elements of that was to establish that safe yield goal by 2025.
Yep.
So that meant that by year 2025, right around the corner, but back in 1980, they gave us roughly 45 years then to kind of have this soft landing. We're going to reach this level of sustainability. It's really what safe yield is where we're not mining groundwater anymore. But the state understood, too, that we could use some of our groundwater resources to build an economic base in the state. That just leaving the groundwater totally undeveloped was not going to provide opportunities for growth and businesses and people to even really live here. So that was a key element. Right when that act was passed in 1980, they said that is the end to increased agriculture. That was a big point, and we'll talk about that in a future slide. But so we had a lot of agriculture in our area, and they said, okay, from this point forward, we're not going to let you subjugate more lands. You can use what you got, but we're not going to let you build anymore.
Okay.
So that was a way to preserve kind of what was in there,
okay.
not increase the.
It's kind of like a starting point.
Starting point, yeah. It was a significant starting point. And then what you said about the Consumer Protection Act, and that is what we call the 100-year Assured Water Supply Program. And so that means that all planned developments have to prove that they have at least a 100-year supply of water before they can sell a lot or build a house on a lot.
And when you say have to prove, who do they prove it to?
To that big agency down there in Phoenix.
Okay, that big building behind the
big building behind a little
palm tree. Yeah. Okay.
So they don't prove that to the town of Prescott Valley. They prove that to the state agency that's in charge of all of these water resources. So it is a consumer protection program to ensure that for people that are building in these planned subdivisions, their home has water for at least 100 years.
Okay. Makes sense. And one thing, too, is that the Prescott AMA, the active management area for the city of the Prescott AMA itself, all of our water is underground water, well water. No use for surface water.
Well, in Prescott Valley, we don't have surface water. Prescott does have surface water resources in Watson and Willow and a few other lakes.
Right, but for the bulk of the water being used for consumption, comes from we have water credits or water rights for certain acre feet in those two
in the lakes,
but
right. Yeah, Prescott Valley is
they're just credits,
right. Prescott Valley primarily relies on groundwater.
Okay,
so bringing that forward as to how those laws work, and this is an important concept that I think the public struggles with. Especially if you come from another area and you're not familiar with how things are done, it's the state of Arizona, the Department of Water Resources, in part, but the state of Arizona, the legislature that creates water laws and approves water supplies and approves use of those water supplies. Our town council in Prescott Valley is not granted that authority.
Okay.
So those decisions are made at the state level. So when a subdivision is approved for water, not for its building codes or whether it's in the right zoning, that's allowed. That's town of Prescott Valley's role, but not water.
Okay.
And it's important to know that the water allocation is made when the lots are created. So a developer has to draw out their master plan and submit it to the state and say, this is how much water I need. And then on the same hand, show how much water they own with water rights. And the state looks at this carefully. They have models to model how much water's in the groundwater system or otherwise, and decides whether or not that developer will get what's called a certificate of assured water supply.
Okay. Could the town of Prescott Valley allow a subdivision without an assured water certificate?
No.
Okay, it's
town
legally not allowed.
It's legally not allowed.
Okay.
The town, the state agency has to approve the certificate of assured water supply, and it has to be on that plat map before it goes to town council for final approval, and before that developer can sell an individual lot.
Okay.
So it has to be certificated.
Right, and the town of Prescott Valley may not, by law, develop allow a subdivision to be within the town limits without having an assured water supply granted by ADWR.
That is correct.
Okay.
And that developer can't sell lots
Okay.
without that. Now, on the same scale, the town can't override the decision once it's made. If the state agency decides that that certificate is valid, they've provided the certificate of assured water supply for that development, the town council can't rescind that decision. It can't say, no, we don't believe the state, and we think you're wrong. State does, the town council doesn't have that authority. The state is granted that authority.
Okay. Makes sense.
So it's a very high standard, and it's a difficult standard to reach.
Well, because we're in the AMA, that consumer protection that's provided by the AMA, it's a really good thing for anybody moving to our area.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, I get calls from people from far out of state, areas that get a lot of rain, those sorts of things,
Yeah.
whatever that is.
Yeah. Yeah.
But and they wonder what's going on in Arizona. Can they live here? They want to come here for the climate and probably get out of that rain.
Yeah.
But once I explained to them that we have one of the strictest consumer protection programs in the nation, they seem to be okay coming here.
Could you say that water in the state of Arizona is highly managed? Could you identify it as such that people are paying really close attention to water use and water levels and everything to do with water in the state of Arizona, especially in the AMAs?
Absolutely, very closely looked at. The Arizona Department of Water Resources, for example, has 130 or 140 water monitoring wells in this AMA that they monitor on a frequent basis, and they've monitored hundreds, if not thousands more on a less frequent basis. So that helps them to build kind of this real strong understanding of what's going on underground. People say, well, how do you know what's going on underground?
Exactly my next question.
And in our AMA, there are actually on the order of 13,000 wells drilled into our aquifer. And every time a well is drilled, the well driller is by law required to submit a report on what subsurface materials they've encountered on their way down, what the water levels are, and in some cases water quality information. That has to go to the state, and they compile these databases. And sometimes the state itself, on at least 130 wells a year, monitors those water levels so that they constantly update what's going on with our aquifer. So I was talking about the certificates of assured water supply and the plat maps. So just to give an example, the picture of Arizona over on the side, that's actually a picture of a certificate of assured water supply granted to Jasper Phase 1 development in Prescott Valley. That was a long, drawn-out process. And I just want to point out that even though that has a date of 2019, the water supplies that they used were not groundwater. They were renewable supplies, and that was the only way they could develop. Remember at the beginning of our presentation, I said we haven't had a new groundwater allocation in Prescott Valley in 22 years. Those developments are moving forward on reclaimed water. So wastewater that was once discharged and just gotten rid of, now we're recharging it and creating a renewable supply out of wastewater.
Okay, let's talk about that just for a second so we're clear on what you're calling wastewater. What does wastewater to you mean? What is that, effluent?
Well, we create effluent out of it. It comes into our treatment plant as influent, we call it. So it's wastewater. Okay. It goes through the treatment process. We treat it to an A+ standard. So that includes filtration and UV disinfection. And then we put it back in the ground. We recharge it back into the aquifer.
Okay.
But we put it in the aquifer in a safe location and in a safe way. We have to obtain permits. We have to demonstrate water quality standards on all of that water. And it's put in the ground where it goes through, hundreds of feet of additional filtration and natural filtration,
right, and
is miles away from our pumping wells. But what it allows us to do is it's an exchange, a credit exchange, just like, say, your bank. You could put $20 in your bank account at the Chase Bank in Prescott Valley, and you can take it out of the Chase Bank in Prescott at the ATM machine. It's a different $20, but it's still the same credit.
Gotcha.
Right? It's still managed in your account. the Department of Water Resources manages our account the same way. So when we go through all this demonstration process and adhere to all of the permit requirements, they will recognize a certain volume of water recharged, and then they will allow us to withdraw that same volume from a distant well.
Okay.
So that's a renewable source.
Okay. So if you're proving in one place that the water's there, you can withdraw it somewhere else.
Correct.
Just like a bank.
Just like a bank.
Okay. Makes sense. That makes sense. It's a good explanation.
So those, just an example then, and of course the map then would be the plat map that's associated with that certificate. The developer can build or develop those lots. Those lots can be offered as individual sale because they came with that certificate of assured water supply on them. And then they can go forward with that 100-year assured supply.
Okay.
Maybe I already covered this. Again, the developers get those approvals from the state agency and not the town. It's kind of worth maybe repeating. I can't tell you how many times I've said it, and people still ask the same question over. They don't believe that the town does not make those approvals. We issue the building permits at the end, but by then, those developments have already reserved their water supply in the aquifer.
And like we covered, you can't create a subdivision in the town of Prescott Valley without the assured water supply in place before the subdivision is permitted.
That's correct.
So everything else falls after
that, right?
The water.
Such as, the town's role then is to make sure, initially that the proposed development fits within the town's general plan. It's in the right zoning class and all that sort of stuff. And then later that the building, proposed building meets town code, and that the water lines that they put in meets town code and all that sort of stuff.
Okay.
So that's our role, is to make sure it's a nice development, meets town code,
Sure.
and that they don't fall flat on providing that infrastructure for the residents.
One of the things that's such an advantage to being in a municipality, let's say, is the effluent, is the recharge, is all of these structures in place to make sure the water quality is good and you're recharging into the aquifer. And what's the percentage of, let's say I use a gallon of water in my house today and it produces effluent, or I flush my toilet and it creates effluent.
Yeah.
How much of that is captured and recharged into the aquifer, percentage-wise?
We capture back 65% of the water we serve.
Okay.
As effluent. So about the only thing we don't capture back is outdoor irrigation, people washing cars outdoors. But pretty much anything that goes back down into your drain from your sink or your shower or your toilet comes back to be treated. About of the 65% we get back, about 80% then is what we recharge, because we serve some of that water directly to a golf course, and that then is a way to preserve groundwater, is not to use groundwater on the golf course. And we have to use some water just to keep the plant process going within the wastewater plant.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So, and of course, we talk about the town powers, and the town is organized under state code as well.
Okay.
There's Arizona Revised Statutes, Title IX basically tells cities and towns what they can and can't do. I mean, the state governs a lot of what we do. And I think it's important to point out that certainly in Prescott Valley, we have had a philosophy, and we can prove that we've adhered to it, is that we don't subsidize development in Prescott Valley in any way, shape, or form. We don't provide water supplies, those water rights. Those developers have to pay for and obtain their water rights. We don't pay for roads. We don't pay for pipelines. We don't pay for any of the infrastructure that they may need. Is all on the backs of the developers, including if we need additional well capacity to serve them, they will either pay the town for that, or they will drill their own wells and dedicate them to the town.
Okay.
So,
wow.
So
So when you say existing residents do not subsidize growth, growth pays for growth.
Growth pays for growth.
And you can prove it.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. So,
Okay.
yeah, okay.
I love this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff on one slide.
Whoop.
We wanted
There we
to
go.
talk here, Bob, about what is the aquifer. Yeah, so
Exactly.
talked a
Good.
lot about management. Now, what is really kind of the aquifer? So the polygon there on the left is the outline of the Prescott Active Management Area that we saw on the state map earlier.
Okay.
And the colored polygon in the middle is where the primary aquifer exists.
Okay.
Okay, so there's groundwater more or less throughout, but it doesn't necessarily create productive wells. So you see people along Williamson Valley Road or further out Highway 89. They have wells, but those are not really very productive zones.
Okay.
So that colored area is kind of the primary aquifer. Generally within that aquifer, you're going to find productive wells. So that's where Prescott Valley's wells are. That's where Chino Valley's wells are. And, of course, as you know, that's also where Prescott's wells are.
Yes.
Even though Prescott's further to the southwest corner of that, Prescott withdraws its water from Chino Valley and from the airport.
That's
so
correct.
we all depend on that aquifer. And we do know the total volume because of all those wells we've drilled in. The total volume in storage is around 2.9 million acre feet.
Okay.
So what? Yeah,
I know. Yeah, you knew I was going to ask this, right?
Yes.
Tell everybody how much is an acre foot of water?
325,851 gallons.
Okay.
So
what's that? What's that? 326,000.
Just short of 326,000 gallons. So in Prescott Valley, that will serve about 3.5 homes for a year, each acre foot.
Okay. So the average home uses about
less than a third,
quarter, probably about a quarter, a fourth of an acre foot of water a year.
Right.
Now, as a shoot off or an offsite, in agricultural water, if you're talking about ag water being used on that same property, it would be 4 times as much?
Yeah, you would need to put about 4 acre feet per acre to, say, grow alfalfa here.
Okay, so rooftops are, as far as water allocation goes and water usage goes, much more less water use than an ag, somebody growing crops.
Right.
Okay.
Per acre. Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So okay, Mr. Smarty.
Okay.
Why in the world do we still stick with this acre feet, this 326,000, just a little short of acre foot of water? Why do we measure it like that? What is there a reason for that?
It's really just the historic content of it.
And
Our earlier, development of water resources in our area was for agriculture.
Okay.
And it was easy to understand that I need a foot of water to go on an acre of land, or 4 feet of water to go on an acre of land. So we developed our whole system of water laws and water rights really around
based
that
on
measure.
the
old acre foot thing.
So an acre
the miners used to use it a measurement called miners inches.
Oh, okay.
So everybody had their kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's really it's just old tradition.
It's conviction.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not trying to fool anybody. Just the way. Yeah. Okay.
So what does that mean? If anybody's been around Lake Pleasant, in context, that volume of water would fill about 2.5 Lake Pleasants. So that's the lake just on the other side of the Bradshaws there, north of Phoenix. And it's a big lake. That's the picture of it there. Or it would fill about 630 Watson lakes.
Okay.
Yeah, so quite a volume of water in there.
Yeah, and we know that water's down there,
right?
Because of all the monitoring wells that we have in the aquifer.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So, and
well, that feels good.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds like a lot of water.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about how long does that really last. It's not a supply that will last indefinitely.
No.
But it's not a supply we're going to run out of tomorrow or next year either.
Okay.
So we have time. The legislature designed and gave us time to deal with it. Mm-hmm. We are overdrafting. We are pulling more water out of that aquifer than goes in annually. Something on the order of seeing across the board wells drop about 1 or 1.5 feet per year.
Right. Now, folks got to understand that this was pretty much identified that we needed to do something way back in 1980 by creating the AMAs.
Right.
And then by what year did we recognize and begin to address a water mining issue in our AMA? What year? 1998?
Well, right about 1990, the Department of Water Resources recognized that we needed to import additional supplies.
Okay.
Just like the other active management areas where they have water supplies from the Central Arizona Project Canal.
Right.
They understood that for economic development here, we would need those additional supplies.
Does Santa Cruz have CAP water?
It does not.
No, it does not. So that one and Prescott are the ones without CAP.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
And so the little diagram, the cake diagram, I call it, up in the upper right there, kind of a cutaway of what an aquifer might look like. I apologize for using the lake as an example of how much we have, but our underground supplies are not like a lake. It's not like you go down there and it's a Jules Verne kind of environment where there's kind of a lake down there. It's not. It's water that's held between the pore spaces in the alluvial material primarily. So way back when, our mountains were taller and our valley was deeper, and that material eroded down, the sand and the silt and the clay, and filled up the valley floor, and then that water's contained within that substrate. And, from a rough perspective, about 10% of that total volume is saturated water, recoverable water. So,
and it depends on where you are in the aquifer, how long it takes to percolate down.
Right.
When water comes on the surface of the land, right?
Right.
And generally speaking, it's years. Is it years?
No. So it percolates down pretty fast. So we have recharge facilities. That's why we know. We built a recharge facility in 2013, for example, and we saw water level rises within 18 months.
Okay.
So it took about 18 months to go down about 150 feet. So pretty fast down, but that's because gravity is working on it directly. Where it's really slow is moving laterally.
Oh, okay.
So it has a very low, fairly gentle slope. And so just like rolling a marble across a crooked table, it moves slower than if it drops off the edge of the table.
Gotcha. Okay.
So just an idea. And our water table isn't flat. They call it a water table, but it's not flat. It is higher in some places and lower in others. So at the margins of the basin, it's a lot higher than it is at the middle of the basins.
Okay.
And when we pump a well, we actually have to kind of create a hole in the aquifer. We call it a cone of depression. And that's how gravity pushes water towards the well so that you can withdraw it. You have to kind of create that.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And so going back in time, then I wanted to point this out because this is an important concept on how water management has worked. I said in 1980, the state said we're not going to allow any more increases on groundwater for irrigation. But prior to that time, we had an irrigation-intensive economy. That was what most of our water use was for. So if you look back to this graph, 1965 is when it starts, the 70s, the early 80s. We withdrew a lot of water per year for irrigated agriculture. Over time, that use transitioned then because we have these groundwater management rules in place. That water was transitioned through management of those water rights and certificates and that sort of thing into the rooftops. So even though we've grown from 1965, a population in the area of probably 10,000 people to what we have now in the whole AMA basin of maybe 220 or something, a lot of new people. But we have not increased groundwater withdrawals in 56 years.
So say it a different way.
Okay.
Say it a different way.
We're not pumping any more than we used to.
Okay, so back if you look at that chart, I would say that 1975 to 1980, we were pumping and using much more water, substantially much more water than we are today.
Correct. Even though we've grown.
And we're a little bit of up and down here in the last 5 years or so, but it has still tends to have a downward projection.
Downward projection, even though you see growth. That's because of good water management policies, because of water conservation, and the management programs that every time you seem to make a step with ADWR, they find a way to make a cut to the aquifer, a way to preserve more water in the aquifer. And the pie chart kind of shows, what is our net withdrawal above what is the safe yield limit. So we do get natural recharge into our aquifer. Mother Nature provides more or less water depending on how wet of a year it is. But our long-term average, according to the Department of Water Resources, is about 10,000 acre-feet per year. That's acre-feet per year on the Y scale. So if you look at that line, that would be, if we could get our groundwater withdrawals down to that line. And again, this is not just Prescott Valley. This is all of the groundwater users in the basin. If we could get our combined use down to that 10,000 acre-foot per year limit, we would be at that safe yield goal.
Okay.
That's a pretty significant attainment. That's what we're working for.
And define safe yield again one more time.
Again, that's a sustainability level. That's when we're not withdrawing any more groundwater than is naturally artificially replenished. Okay. So we're at that point a supply that would last indefinitely.
Right.
Yeah. So our net withdrawal then is about 3/1,000ths of the total volume in the aquifer per year.
3/1,000ths of
Right.
the aquifer per year that
Right.
we're drawing now.
Right. Yes. Now, again, we can't keep that up forever. I can't say that translates to a 300-year supply because you'll never get all of the water out of the aquifer, nor do we ever want to get to that point where we're looking for water that way. Again, that's well outside of my lifespan, so
Of course.
hopefully we get that dealt with before.
All right. Well, explain this.
I know.
This looks really,
It's kind of almost scary.
really interesting. Yeah.
This shows how the managed growth programs, the Department of Water Resources water management programs have affected residential approvals in Prescott Valley. And we talked about kind of a important moment was 1980, the passage of the Groundwater Management Act. Prior to that point in time, Prescott Valley had about 11,000 approved lots. Okay, those were platted lots. They didn't have to follow the Assured Water Supply rules. They were actually before that.
Oh, okay.
But they were recognized. Once the 1980 Groundwater Management Act came in, they recognized those lots and
Okay.
they had a 100-year supply.
Okay.
So then in the next roughly 20 years, up to about 1999, new residential lots were allowed to access groundwater. They were given a groundwater allocation by the state. Again, the town didn't give those allocations, but the state said, if you come to us, the developer would go decide they wanted to build the development. They'd apply to the state, and the state would say, okay, we'll give you an assured water supply certificate, because the rule then was that if you had enough water below your development down to 1,000 feet below ground to sustain your development for 100 years,
Okay.
they got the certificate. So a lot of people are angry at the state for doing that, but that was the law. And the developers followed the law and the state followed the law. And what it meant was roughly those 11,000 lots, about 8,000 have been developed, another roughly 3,000 are kind of in the works, have an allocation. They have an allocation that was granted 22 years or more ago. It is a mining allocation. So it basically says you're going to draw more water out of the aquifer than is safe. But, so you say, well, how is that a 100-year supply? Well, it was a 100-year supply, and it kind of seems foolish to say, okay, we're going to go ahead and grant this supply or these developments a supply based off of mined groundwater. But the backstop had always been the idea that we're going to reach safe yield in 2025. And so they're only going to mine groundwater. If they got their certificate in 1999, they were only going to mine groundwater for the next 26 years, and then it would stop because we would reach safe yield. And the way the state designed us to reach safe yield was through imported supplies.
Okay. So the thinking was we can do this now because of our plan for 2025 safe yield.
Right.
And we did that through the last part of what you said, importing water
Right.
into
Right.
our area to make up the difference.
Right.
Okay. That's
Exactly.
always
Well,
been in the plan.
Right.
Okay.
Well, it's like a young person wanting to buy a house, knowing that they can go get a bank loan and pay it back with earnings to come in the future. We all do that.
Yeah.
We know and the banks accept that. We know we're going to get those earnings in the future to pay back that bank loan. In the same way, the state said you're going to bring in additional water to pay back kind of this temporary loan on mined groundwater.
Okay. All right. Makes sense.
So it also means then that 100-year assurance is much longer than 100 years. I've had that question a number of times. Well, okay, it's a 100-year assured supply.
Yeah.
What happens in year 101? Well, when we reach safe yield, that time frame extends indefinitely.
Yeah.
You don't end.
Right.
So that's why it's so important to reach safe yield. We don't have to think about the end of time with our water supplies.
Sure, of course it makes sense. If you're going to gallon in, gallon out kind of a thing, then everybody kind of understands that.
Right.
Okay, so
it's and it won't be the balanced every year. Some years will be drier and wetter, but that's
okay. Well, we're awful close to 2025.
We are. Now, to finish on the graph, though,
okay.
What happened in 1999? That was when the Department of Water Resources says we're not going to issue any more groundwater allocations. Nothing new in terms of groundwater. We're not going to give anybody that bank loan.
Yep, we're done.
We're done. No more bank
mortgages.
loans based off of mined groundwater.
Okay.
So it stopped cold, and you can see what that did in Prescott Valley. It stopped the issuances of new lots in a very significant way. The only lots that are issued in Prescott Valley in 22 years are based off of that reclaimed supply.
Oh, okay.
Which is a very expensive supply. So again, the developers have to pay for that.
Okay.
It's not freely given. So it has a huge impact on growth. I know people see growth along Glassford Hill and go, oh, you're growing crazy. But those are lots that received their water allocation 22 years ago, and the lots that received their groundwater allocation recently, there's very few of them.
Yep. Well, obviously.
Yeah. I think this covers some of what I just said. So those pre-1999 subdivisions, groundwater mining allowed down to a depth of 1,000 feet. But if you had a 100-year supply down to 1,000 feet, they said, okay. But you have to get to that safe yield level, and then it'll be okay. So,
gotcha.
And then the post-99 subdivisions, again, no increased draft on the aquifer. You can only use those renewable supplies, and that makes a sustainable source.
Okay, makes sense to me.
So I hope that kind of gets across the idea of where Prescott Valley's role is. I hope I answered the first question.
I think, because there's so much management around the water issue and all these other peripheral things, and they're not peripheral, but lot designations and all that, and they recognized that all that was going on, and they stopped it because the whole thing was predicated on this requirement for safe yield by 2025. Now, before we go, let's make it clear: 2025 is close.
It is.
As far as these kinds of issues go.
Right.
We can't, if you include conservation and capturing and reusing effluent and all the other things, we can't get to safe yield unless we import water.
Absolutely correct. Yes.
Okay, so it's important for the public, everybody to understand that that's an integral part of
the whole water management equation.
Right. And it's not something we've ignored. It's not something, back in 2004, the two communities, Prescott and Prescott Valley, acquired the Big Chino, what I call the Big Chino Water Ranch,
right,
for this part of the plan.
Right.
And
even longer, quite a bit before that, the state legislature passed a law, 1991, granting access to the city of Prescott and the other AMA communities to that source of supply for importation.
To acquire.
To acquire and bring in. So that's been on the books, on Prescott's books. Kudos to Prescott for that long-range planning and working towards developing that supply.
Right.
Prescott Valley, a lot of people don't know this. We've only actually been in the water service business since 1999. Prescott Valley was served by a private water company.
Shamrock Water Company.
Shamrock, and we acquired that in 1999, and we got into the water business at that point in time. Pretty new to the game in that sense, right? Prescott's been serving water since the 1880s, so
been a while.
Been a while. So they have a more robust portfolio. They have the Watson and Willow Lakes. They have Goldwater Lake and all that stuff. But they went out there and they started acquiring water ranches in the Paulden area in the mid-'90s. Bought the Dugan Ranch and the Weber Ranch, and then later on decided that to protect the flows in the Upper Verde, which is near the Paulden area,
right,
to move up to that Big Chino Water Ranch. And it was at that point in time that Prescott said, okay, this is a lot more expensive and we need somebody to share costs with.
Sure.
And Prescott Valley came into the mix.
And it makes perfect sense.
Right.
To me it does anyway.
Right.
I thought it was a smart move
right
on our community's part. All right. I want to thank everybody for listening and watching. And if you're interested in more information, so it's 928-759-3100. And John Munderloh is the guy you want to talk to, John. So you can contact John and he can fill you in on where to go, at least if he doesn't know the answers. So thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.